economy, our foreign relations, our justice system, our governance, our international competitiveness, our education, our world class festivals and entertainment, sports, politics, regional cooperation, and much more. Globally positioning Dominica within the Caribbean. Join the conversation on the Global View on Q. Tune in, call us, have your say. The Global View on Q, only on Q95, the big station.
I would want election reform to make it clear, absolutely clear, that election political parties who are participating in the national election have the right to fly in their supporters to Dominica, whether or by plane, boat, hovercraft, helicopter, to vote. Let us put in place the necessary changes that are going to put an end to a lot of this nonsensical discussion that is taking place. The suggestion that a political party who arranges transportation for its supporters to come to vote is committing fraud or bribery, to me is total and absolute hogwash in the modern day. But let's say that there's some old-time law cases on it. Let us clarify it and make it very clear who is entitled to vote and who not entitled to vote. We've got to put a stop to it. So they want election reform, we should give them election reform. But across the board, not just a national ID card. The law is and has been for the last 100 years that even if the returning officer or the registration officer, whoever does the nomination day, knows for a fact that Mr. Li Pingxing, who comes to file the nomination papers with his endorsers and seconders, born in China, resident in Dominica for 1 week, they cannot stop him from being registered. There is no jurisdictional or legal basis for an injunction to prevent anybody from being nominated.
Hello, everybody. Good evening, all, and a very, very warm welcome to you in Radio Land and on the internet world at home and abroad. Thank you for choosing Q95. This is the Global View on Q. Warm welcome to all of you, Q family listeners at home and globally. I'm Sheridan Gregoire, Mr. G. It's Tuesday, March 21, 2023, just about 8:01 p.m. at Q95. It is, in fact, the 12th Tuesday of 2023. So we're live on Facebook and YouTube. Please follow us at Q95 FM Radio. Our website is www.q95ga.com. Please share the live, like our pages, get the latest breaking news and reviews as it happens, when it happens, on Q95, the big station. We are continuing to revive the spirit of graciousness, love and peace, prosperity and unity among our Kalinagro and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters. Tonight we say electoral reform is a must. The DLP regime in office likes the electoral system exactly the way it is now, given the most recent statements from its leader. Here are a few things, a few talking points and some questions to guide our discussions tonight. Are we, in fact, witnessing the rise and fall of Dominica's democracy? Is that what we're seeing right before our eyes? Is Dominica walking towards a precipice? Are we on the brink, on the edge? Dominicans should heed all of the signs of the destruction of their nation. Dominicans must now read the writing on the wall, because Dominicans are the only ones who can save themselves, but are they ready and willing to do so? Electoral reform is obviously the way forward to steer Dominica back on the path of true democracy, human rights, civil liberties, free speech, free media, and economic freedom through free and fair elections on a level playing field. Let be a level playing field, and then let the chips fall where they may, who run for election, who win, who lose. But will the Dennis Byron reforms advance the cause of democracy in Dominica? Will they create a level playing field? Will his final report restore faith in our democratic system of electing a government? Or will it contain hidden traps? Or as a friend of mine would say, will it contain diabasak? Or will the DLP regime leader table the right laws in parliament? Time will tell. My distinguished guests tonight, Justice Dr. Irving Andre, former Prime Minister Edison James. We hope that we might have had Attorney Gabriel Christian here tonight with us, but he just sent me a little note saying he's down with the flu. And in fact, he sent me a voice note. I could hardly hear what he was saying. So I have to apologize for Gable. His voice, he has a little flu, and his voice does not allow him to come on here and be with us tonight. But I'm sure he'll be listening attentively to everything that we're saying here tonight. So Dr. Andre and former Prime Minister Edson James, they will revisit the Phase 1 draft electoral reform laws presented to Dominica by Sir Dennis Byron, and they will bring some clarity, hopefully, and some unambiguity, and remove any lingering doubts. Because I've heard people talking who have doubts, because some people are saying one thing, others are saying other things. There is some lingering doubt. I hope we can bring some clarity on this tonight, so that all Dominicans at home and abroad can move forward together, united with one voice for electoral reform and free and fair elections. Dr. Andre and former Prime Minister James hopefully will unravel the issues and concerns arising out of Sir Dennis Byron's recently recommended draft laws. And going forward, as we await Sir Dennis Byron's final report, which is due in a few days, just a few days, with critical recommendations, hopefully, for campaign finance reforms and other electoral imperatives. But now we must all look forward to embracing a dynamic drive for proper public information, participation, and active engagement to ensure that free and fair elections are enshrined in Dominica's new electoral laws and recommendations. However, the question remains, will it require mass, peaceful public gatherings of Dominicans to present the demand for transparency, accountability, integrity, and a level playing field? Only time will tell. However, please stay tuned to Q95 FM radio on Facebook and on YouTube. Call us. Have your say, as you do every Tuesday, on the Global View on Q with me, Mr. G. Once the people's desired appropriate new electoral legislation is enacted in our parliament, we expect that Dominica's Electoral Commission will then play its part in informing and educating the electorate and ensuring that the people's voice prevails in assuring that campaign finance reforms are observed and thereby secure that level playing field that we're looking for free and fair democratic elections in Dominica. The Global View on Q, as you know, is continuing to prepare to embrace Dominica's 45th anniversary of independence. This November 2023, 45 years of independence. And tonight, with our distinguished guests, we look forward to subsequently restructuring, hopefully, the Electoral Commission itself in the future, so as to ensure that the appropriate sectors and civil society are meaningfully represented. That is not just subject to being manipulated or made to act on the whims and fancies of any political directorate. So wherever you are in Dominica, in the region and globally, tell your friends, your associates, tune in, call in, join the conversation, and get the answers to your questions. Tonight, we talk about completing and implementing all necessary electoral reforms by May 2023, in keeping with the schedules already suggested by Sir Dennis Byron, passing new people-approved electoral laws in Parliament by May 2023. The Electoral Commission doing its work to cleanse the voters list, complete the re-registration verification process in Dominica, issue voter ID cards, implement the new laws, including campaign finance laws and regulations, these things, and get these things done over the ensuing 5 months. Certainly they can do that to ensure Electoral Commission is truly in a position to hold free and fair elections at any time after our 45th anniversary of independence, which falls on 3rd November of this year, 2023. So all right-thinking Dominicans must therefore rally for good governance and ensure that our constitution protects the independence of the institutions that are the pillars of our democracy. These institutions must not be subject to the whims, fancies, and manipulations of any political directorate or politicians that have gone rogue or who may have authoritarian or dictatorial tendencies or aspirations. So going forward, our constitution, and hopefully, if we can get this thing that has been deluding us for so long now, a duly appointed parliamentary commissioner, hopefully all of that will ensure that truly independent commissioners and national commissions, such as the Electoral Commission, the Integrity in Public Office Commission, we hear so little about it, the Police Service Commission, the Public Service Commission, and the like. We hear what is happening in St. Vincent right now, that all of these can truly function as independent institutions as we continue to recognize and strive to achieve the imperative of true resilience and sustainability of our Carinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters. So as usual, a huge shout out, hugs, much love, appreciation, and a big thank you to our healthcare providers, frontline workers, police and fire officers, teachers, doctors, nurses, other public officers. Happy to have you all with us tonight. We welcome every Dominican and friend of Dominica warmly. We embrace you wherever you are tonight, in every nook and cranny, in every village, in every community in Dominica, in the region and globally. Thank you, Sherwin, keeping us on the air. Thank you, Lambi, being on the console with us tonight again, directing the traffic. We will take your calls a little later. The Onion numbers are posted on our website on the homepage at Q95, www.q95ga.com. The people's voice is always a priority for us. Please call us. Let's get started. I go first to Dr. Irving Andre to reopen the lead on Sir Dennis Byron's Phase 1 report and bring clarity on the way forward while we await his Phase 2 report in a few days, this March. And I hope that right after Dr. Andre, former Prime Minister Edison James will also comment substantively on his expectations from Sir Dennis Byron's Phase 2 report. And then, of course, we just heard a moment ago, I just wanted to know that I just heard the words of a Dominican attorney on electoral reform. So I hope that our illustrious guests will also take the opportunity to comment on that. But meanwhile, I hope all of our guests will offer some comments on Dominica's aspirations of building an international airport in the Marigot Wesley Woodford area. There's so much talk about that lately. So many divergent views. We need to have one view as a nation and where we want to go forward on this. It's a major investment. And hope they can express their views on the various positions being taken by persons who have been making all these public comments about the 3 airport development proposals that have been presented by the last 3 administrations. Under the Dominica Freedom Party, the United Workers' Party, and the current Dominica Labour Party, I personally think we need a decent, modern, comfortable, welcoming airport facility in which the ambience portrays the theme and reality of Dominica being the nature island of the Caribbean, in a manner that upon arrival, returning residents, aircraft passengers, and visitors will immediately feel that they are indeed entering the nature island of the Caribbean. You don't need a 12,000-foot runway. Maybe an 8,000-foot will do because, you know, we have STOL aircraft engines these days that can land on much shorter runways. So I hope all my esteemed guests will also share their views on the imminent exit from the office of the president by Mr. Charles Angelo Savre in October 2023. The process, I think, is sometime that process really takes effect in terms of discussion from July or so, but we're already in March, so it's not too early to start talking about it. The process by which this is supposed to take place under the Dominica Constitution, there is a lot of speculation, and that is mounting as to who will succeed Mr. Savre. The question is the role of the leader of the opposition in Parliament in terms of either accepting the Prime Minister's nominee or nominating her own candidate for president, and the possible engagement of the public in the process. I certainly hope the public will be engaged in the process in one way or another. And then, of course, let's look at this timeline in which all of this is to be done prior to October. As I said, I believe that process begins really taking effect from July, but I think Mr. James will guide us further on that. Dr. Andre, I want to go over to you now to get the ball rolling. I now yield to you. Please open your mic and say good night to the folks.
Good night, everyone. Can you hear me, Mr. G?
I'm hearing you very, very clearly.
Wonderful. Good night, Lambi. And again, you continue to do well, and I commend you for that. Mr. James, good to see you. Mr. G, as always. I'm sorry that Gabriel is not with us. I'm not a doctor, but I can offer him some free advice in terms of dealing with that cold that he has. He has two options, basically, I would suggest. Probably a glass of two of rum and honey might do it. Or if he wants something to work much faster, something much stronger, perhaps he could take a glass of milk of magnesia, sprinkled with some garlic powder. And he will be surprised at how quickly he will get some remedy out of one of these two options. But that's not why I'm here this evening. I'm here to
I knew you used to do some farming, but I didn't realize that you were such a big thing on the road.
you don't know the list of it, Mr. James. Probably is just as well.
Well,
But
okay.
let me say good evening to your listeners. I know that we're in Lent. It's a season of sober reflection. Reflection not only on things deeply spiritual and religious, but reflection on the basis of where we are as a community, where we are as a nation. And I think now is the time, because we are facing some very, very serious issues that we have to get very clear about. Let me start my opening remarks addressing a few pressing issues, which hopefully at least can enlighten. It may not, because let's put it this way, some of us are fixed in our ways, and that's just how it is. But hopefully, given particularly the fact that we are in this season of reflection, that we can reflect on things that are near and dear to us as a nation. Let me indicate by saying that the search for meaningful electoral reform in Dominica is as futile as the search for evidence of Dominica's productive past, such as, for example, a can of dumbfruit orange juice, Bello guava cheese, a pair of By-Trini pair of jeans, or probably some crabbacks at this time of the year. Now, unlike all our sister islands in the Caribbean, we cannot seem to locate true electoral reform. Why? Despite reports from the OAS, a current prime minister in the Caribbean, a group of concerned citizens, blessed by a reverend pastor, despite concrete examples in other Caribbean islands, despite an important ruling from the CCJ, those in the political directorate are still hell-bent on hoodwinking Dominica about electoral reform. They have retained a Goliath in the judicial fraternity to come up with a patchwork of proposed reforms that would cement their hold in power and lay the foundation for the stranglehold over the reins of power. Some of their disciples have symbolically handcuffed the expertise of Sir Byron and worked to ensure that whatever proposal he makes concerning electoral reforms would not threaten in any way, in any shape, in any form, their impregnable grip on the electoral process in Dominica. The more they do, Dominica is sinking into a deeper, muddy grave than the Morocco Hotel at the Cabrits. Disclosures about Jumbie money from a dubious bank in Dominica loaned to Donald Trump. A sinister structure in Roseau whose owner nobody sees or nobody knows. Evidence that Dominicans may have been involved in a conspiracy to kidnap Mehul Choksi and send him back to India. The French warning Dominica about human trafficking. All collectively show that Dominica is being smothered into a lifeless lump, while the old historic village of Wesley is being laid to rest. And as all this unravels, a voice raises out of the subdued form of Dominica, from its head, located at the Cabrits, to its feet, located at Scott's Head. And the voice cries, "Who speaks for me? Who is coming to my rescue?" Now, given their dogged opposition to meaningful electoral reform, why are we now hearing that we want to legislate the proposals of Sir Byron once and for all? Why is the senior counsel, mudslinger, or whatever, I don't know, now saying that there is nothing wrong with passing, with the paying of the passages of supporters to come to Dominica to vote? Why is there such an urgency to pass what Sir Byron is proposing? Why was there a rush to have an election on December the 6th? It is clear that the strident opposition to meaningful reforms in the past suggests clearly, as night is day, that there is no interest in meaningful reforms in Dominica. What is there in Sir Byron's first report and in his second report that have left members of the political directorate so gung-ho and so excited about the prospect of enabling those reforms? The answer is not blown in the wind. It is right before our very eyes. You see, Mr. G, on the last occasion that I spoke about this, I expressed my concerns about the so-called compromise, which would enable Dominicans who visited Dominica for a total period of, is it 90 days, can meet the residency requirements to vote. I expressed serious concerns about that. Why? Because it gives an underground passage to the evisceration and, frankly, to enable the authorities to do exactly what they've been doing with no change whatsoever. I have before me a document which I received from a member of the Sir Byron team as they grappled with a proposal for Dominica. The document is entitled, quote, "Revised Draft Registration of Electors Act, Part 1, Preliminary." Note the word preliminary. My understanding that this preliminary draft was done in April of 2022. And it has some information which confirms, for those who did not know, that that proposal with respect to allowing Dominicans abroad to vote is a cynical capitulation to the Directorate regarding who should vote in Dominica, regarding the present rules governing voting eligibility in Dominica. But here, think carefully, reflect on what I've just said. The so-called proposal which Sir Byron suggested, that is to say, if you live in St. Kitts, or if you live in New York, or Toronto, or wherever, okay, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years. If you come back within a 5-year period, you spend 90 days in Dominica, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. James, I think it's 90 days is the proposal. Then you meet the residency requirements in the legislation to vote. But you can see the effect of such a proposal. But listen carefully to the draft, what was proposed in this preliminary draft, dated April of 2022. Let me read to you. I'll try to keep out the wonderful legal language that nobody cares about, nobody sees or nobody knows, if I may borrow a phrase from the dice. Here's what it says. Subject to subsection 2, for the purposes of a few sections, listen carefully, a person is deemed not to reside in Dominica if the person, having traveled to another country to live and to work indefinitely, has resided outside of Dominica for a period exceeding 5 years, and at the relevant time has not relocated to Dominica to reside indefinitely. And it is immaterial whether the person, Mr. G, I'm getting a cold just like Gabriel. Let me repeat that line. And it is immaterial whether the person A visits Dominica during that period. Mr. G, Utan Sagasa. Whether the person visits Dominica during the period, B intends ultimately to return to Dominica. Subsection 1 does not apply to a person who is employed to the state on service abroad or to the spouse of that person. We understand that. And relevant time means the period during which the decision whether or not a person's name should be deleted from a register or list must be made, having regard to the time frame in the act for the preparation, as the case may be, revision of any register or list. So in effect, the draft provision before that cynical capitulation in the phase 1 of Sir Byron's report indicates clearly and unequivocally that you are not deemed to reside in Dominica if, having traveled to another country to live and to work indefinitely, you've resided outside of Dominica for a period exceeding 5 years, and it is immaterial whether the person visits Dominica during that period. Oh, dear Sayyid Maui Joseph, what is Sir Byron doing? Why has he allowed his integrity to be thrown by the wayside? I come to Dominica, quite frankly, I can speak on a person quite often, once, twice, and in some instances 3 times a year. Pay my passage, I come because I want to come. I have relatives there, I have research there. I like to see things happen in Dominica, quite frankly. Fortunately, I don't have to depend on anybody to pay my passage, really. But that is the price of making a decision to live and to work abroad. I don't want someone to have to pay my passage to come to Dominica for 3 days. Why am I coming to Dominica for 2 to 3 days? To watch the Tutulu crabs at Purple Turtle in Portsmouth? Probably to visit the bakeries in Marigot, in Newtown, or in Foncole? To take a sea bath? Why should it be correct that someone does that with the sole reason of coming to vote in an election at a time when the current existing laws doesn't provide for that? Now, I heard some of the comments by the senior counsel. Let me ask you this. If you had to rely, Mr. G, on the opinion regarding whether or not accepting a bribe or accepting money to come to vote for a particular political entity, whether or not it's a crime, let me ask you this. Whose opinion would you rely on? The senior mudslinger or someone like Sir Brian Arlene? I don't know if you care to answer, Mr. G. You're a man of great wisdom.
Well, yes, I would say that
Whose opinion would you rely on as being fair, as being independent, and as being intellectually based on the law as it exists today?
I would recognize the opinion of Sir Brian, but I would accept the opinion of Irving Andrew.
Well, because first things first, be patient, Mr. G. I know that you're probably still salivating over that wonderful dinner you had with the black pudding and sauce and lobster. I understand it, Mr. G. But here's what Sir Brian said in 2009. What he said was published in the Dominica.net. Here's what he said. Quote, "What would be illegal is bribery as defined in Section 55 of the House of Assembly Elections Act, Cap 201. Carefully. Valuable consideration is consideration that confers a pecuniarily measurable benefit. Now, these are big words, quite frankly. In fact, my stomach is hurting me just by repeating them. But what the gentleman is saying, consideration under the Act is when you receive something of value, money, l'argent cherche, or not cherche. When you receive something of value in return for coming to vote for a particular entity. In other words, you corrupt that person because he or she is accepting what the law calls consideration or valuable consideration. The law, you see, the lawyers like use big words. In accepting bread or in accepting something else of value for the purpose, when you give someone money or pay someone's passage with the cynical reason of doing so to enable the person to come to Dominica to vote for you, that the law has decided is bribery and it's a crime. And as I speak with you, Mr. G, if I had a time, I can read you the decisions of at least 5 cases of high courts, both in England and in Canada, confirming that that is the law as we understand it. This is what they want to continue. They want to legislate bribery. They want to normalize bribery. They want to legalize bribery. And let me ask you this. Would someone who has an interest in democracy, in the sanctity of the vote, would someone be supporting this bribery in contravention of the existing laws of Dominica? Why do they embrace this so heartedly? Why not embrace, for example, something more meaningful to the human spirit? A leisurely walk in the valley, breathing that lovely air, probably with your little picnic if you have one, enjoying nature in its glory. Why not embrace something like that as opposed to something which is blatantly illegal? The answer is clear. Because the only thing that matters to these folk are how to remain in power indefinitely, and to hell with everything else. To hell with everything else. To hell with Dominicans who cannot enjoy a job in their own country. To hell with those who cannot get a job building the airport. To hell with those who've been thrown out of their homes in Wesley. That is no longer important. What is important is the perpetuation of power, and to hell with the collateral damage. As long as they have a pastor or priest to utter their blessings, that's all that matters. And that is the problem that we have, unfortunately. And it's shocking, in my respectful view, that a man of knowledge, learning, Sir Byron, would allow proposals that reflected the best practices in terms of electoral reform, would allow those to be compromised, at least some of them, particularly those relating to eligibility to vote, in a fashion that would run roughshod over the electoral laws as we understand them today. And probably, Mr. G, probably you know more than you were disclosing. Probably that is why you asked the question. And it's not a rhetorical one. It's an existential one, because it goes to the very root of our being. Who should be proposing what electoral reforms or the parameters of electoral reform? So Byron, who will not make those reforms or propose them in St. Kitts, his home country or home island? Or should we empower Dominicans themselves to ensure that this piece of rock, which has already been compromised so significantly, remain their own? There are good people in Dominica, many good people. Even those, quite frankly, who support the other side. Good rests within the heart and souls of all of us. I can give you an example. Even in the police, there are many good officers. I can just tell you as an aside that somebody I know obtained a Dominican passport after surrendering all the requirement documents and got that passport within a period of a few days. That person was a known non-supporter of the directorate. So there are good people out there in the police force, in other fields, in other spheres, ministries, and so on and so forth. But we should not allow the good to be smothered by the bad and by the ugly. And that is the risk that we're running. People in St. Vincent are saying, nada en poco. We have rights. And we have to stand up to enforce or to protect our interests, protect our future, the futures of our family, our jobs. And this is the price of democracy. We have to stand up. Do you think you can demonstrate in Tiananmen Square in China, Mr. G? I know you have your placard in storage. Do you think you can do that, Gaza? You can't do it. But if it is true, as someone has said to me, that you have some persons who may be involved in building the airport, he's going around Wesley and saying in Chinese, Gaza, kai salam play. And some people haven't even got paid for their property. The umbilical cord between their ancestral home and themselves have been caught without any ability to reconnect it. And is that the price that we have to pay, or some people have to pay? And we are saying that we should be happy because it's Dominica, it's the good of Dominica. You're dispossessing a whole village, or disenfranchising them, cutting them from their ancestral ties. Is that the price that we must pay? Do we have to pay that price? Or is that the quid pro quo in the memorandum of understanding? Is that the price? You see, the so-called development should not be achieved at any cost or at all cost. There has to be a line in the sand where you will say, yes, we can have that, but not at this cost. Not cutting the legs from the Dominicans who've toiled throughout their lives and their families before them. Severing them. One person said he or she was given either a house to live, which is about 1/3 the size of what he or she owned before. Is that the price of development? Would we accept that price if it happened to us individually? The people in Wesley, I know they don't understand Patois, but Yopa Muntu, I can send them a dictionary. Don't they have rights? Shouldn't those rights be protected? Is it just a ban mauvais? Or is all this just another band with skimpy costumes, exposing the greed? No. Dominica should not be left in that state of destitution, bereft of all values. Dominicans have to draw upon that inner strength, the little kings and queens within, to say we have to stand up for our future and we have to stand up for our country. We cannot go to live in Szechuan or Peking or wherever it is, I don't know, to live. That is an option we don't have, you know. So this is how I see it. So Byron is a man of great intelligence, a man who served, but what is being proposed is a permanent stain on his career. And my view is very simple. If you will not impose us, I almost said strangle or saddle your island of origin with what you're proposing here, you shouldn't be proposing it to Dominica. We can't be the last of the last. We don't deserve that. We deserve much better. And that is my view. Thank you.
Thank you for the opening remarks there, Dr. Andre. I suspect we will be coming back to you a little later to talk a little bit more about St. Kitts, what obtains there, and the cases that you reference. Because I suspect that before this is all over, more cases will go before the court. Some of those cases might reach the CCJ, but we saw what happened when the CCJ ruled on one of those cases, and the CCJ suggested, hey, don't have any more elections in this tainted system. Don't do it. It's bad. It's wrong. Don't go there. But we went there anyway. And the CCJ said, look, this case has to go back to the court. And then before you know it, the DPP nully processed that case. So I believe we have to come back and look at some of those cases, Dr. Andre. So we'll touch base on them later. But as I go to Mr. James, I just want to remind us, Mr. James, that maybe if you will turn off your mic, Dr. Andre, that might maybe reduce some of the audio coming through. But Mr. James, let us remind ourselves that the reason why we're still talking about electoral reform today in the way that we're talking about it is because of a famous email that was sent, I think, to the Prime Minister and copied to Mr. Alex Lawrence, I think, which said something about the madness going on at the Electoral Commission. These fellows want to do all kind of things that might change your winning legacy. And then as just before we started the program tonight, I believe it's the same attorney who had this voice talking about this question of paying people's party to take them to vote. And where on earth could that be wrong? That is okay. That should be normalized. And I think this is a concern that Dr. Andre is expressing about this draft legislation, that it may not be doing too much as it is now, as it is currently worded, to prevent that from happening. Mr. James, let me just go over to you. And of course, you did hear some of the comments that were made about this airport and so on. So maybe when you get going, you can just give us your comments on some of those. Over to you, Mr. James. You have to unmute your mic. So thank you. Go right ahead.
Good evening. How are you?
Well, I'm not as good as you, but still working on it.
Dr. Andre? Can you hear me?
He is hearing you, but I think his mic is muted. So if you unmute,
I
make a sign.
That commanding voice, it resonates in my mind.
Good to see you. Okay. Sheridan, thank you for inviting me to be on the program once again. Let me say good evening to you.
Mr. James, before you start, let me just read something from somebody there, because you see, people have already started sending comments. Here's one comment somebody made, and you might be able to comment on that yourself. That's why I wanted to read it before. If we allow a bogus election system in Dominica, not even the supporters of the Labour Party will have a say in who is chosen as government. Here's another comment. Elections that have been manipulated allow those in office to disregard the well-being of the people because they know they cannot be removed by elections. They have been able to divide the people by selective distribution of state resources, but poor governance will eventually lead to chaos. I thought I might read that. It's coming from somebody who you might know.
Okay. But thank you for that, Sheridan. I was saying good evening to you and Lambi. It was good seeing you a few days ago. Had a long chat. I hope you were able to have made some progress on your farm up at Captain Bruce. You didn't bring me any limes as you had promised to do, but then I don't want to expose you to those that you would not want to be exposed to. I'm sure you'll make good on that promise sometime. So good evening to all those who are listening. Sheridan, it's interesting you mentioned the word governance, because in my mind, I wanted to say to those people who might think that electoral reform is neither here nor there, we're wasting time to talk about electoral reform and so on. But, you know, electoral reform is at the heart of the governance of our country. We have a crisis of governance in this country. I listened today to some discussions surrounding a project, a road project, Pokase down to Hatton Garden, Pegwa, where I am here. And people were lamenting about what they considered the inconveniences and the poor work and so that was being done. And I'm thinking to myself that when a government embarks upon a project of this nature, a project that would impact the country which that group of people governs, then it is their responsibility when the project is being designed to ensure that the essential elements that would make this project a worthwhile project and would make it a decent project. It is the responsibility of the governing organization to ensure the design takes into consideration these essential elements. It is their responsibility, is governance, which dictates that the elements, the operational works are such that the people are well served. So that I was reflecting as I heard the discussion, hey, what a breakdown in governance. And so while we were blaming the contractor and so on, and I'm asking myself, well, where was the Minister of Communications and Works? Where were the people who were supposed to have been very much involved in the design of the project and in setting the parameters within which this project should be implemented? It is an issue of governance. When we have a situation in our country where leaders of the country can be talking about their Navy SEALs and their snipers, bearing in mind what that connotes, Navy SEALs and snipers, when you hear about these things, you think about people, you think about violence, you think about killings, you think about maiming. And for us to be comfortable as leaders of our country, to be associating with that kind of rhetoric, there's an issue, there's a crisis of governance. There's a crisis of fear in the country. People are afraid. And when you have the leadership of the country seeking to intimidate people, Annie Edwards, a consummate professional, a qualified professional, a qualified planner, person who has held positions at the highest level in the planning system in our country, makes a comment, not on aircraft flying over air, not on fishermen fishing on the sea, not on woodcutters cutting wood, but on planning matters. And what happens, instead of the leader of the country taking a position where, look, I don't agree with you necessarily, but I note your views. What happens? He comes out with an attitude of derogation, of dismissal, of contempt, of ridicule, and suggesting that something should be done to those people who are opposing, as he suggests, the airport. Who else in this country is best positioned to comment on matters of planning than somebody like Annie Edwards? But that is what we get from our leadership. There's a crisis of governance. There's a crisis of governance when our public servants, our leading functionaries, our people who pay are afraid to advise in accordance with their professional integrity, training, and understanding, but advise in accordance with what they think the people that they're advising want to hear. There's a crisis of governance. When in our country there's no debate, no meaningful debate, no discussion at a serious level, it is foolishness being spoken by people who are former education officers. And I speak here about Brain. They call him Brain. What's his name again? Hartley Adams. And we need to call people out. It is getting beyond where we can hide anybody now. It is stupid and foolish for people like, what's his name, Daryl Titt, a man who is supposed to be trained, to be suggesting that it is treason for somebody to criticize certain aspects of the airport construction. My friend I ask you to rethink that kind of attitude. Rethink that kind of attitude. So it's a crisis of governance, and here it is, elections. Elections have consequences. So when we talk about electoral reform, we cannot just see it in isolation in terms of the words. What does it mean? Elections, it is through elections that the governance, the primary governance of the country is determined. And elections have consequences. It is elections that will determine whether we have a organized and approach to development in this country, whether we stick to the law as it pertains to the construction of an international airport, stick to the law as it pertains to the planning and development of this country. It is elections which determine. It's elections which determine how bread and butter issues will unfold in this country. So let us all resolve to educate, inform our people. Why we listen to them, inform and educate our people, but listen to them as to what mission we are embarking upon when we talk about this electoral reform. Having said that, it is my considered view that the Dominican Labour Party is not interested at all in meaningful electoral reform. It is my considered view. They're not interested at all in meaningful electoral reform. And that is reflected in the way they responded to the notorious email that was sent to the Prime Minister, Mr. Skerritt, by Anthony Astafan and copied to Hartley Henry and Alec Lawrence. When the Electoral Commission, in keeping with its mandate as contained in the Constitution of our country, having the responsibility for managing elections, decided to embark upon an electoral reform program that would include cleaning of the electoral list and the issuing of ID cards for voting. And under the direction of Anthony Astafan, and I think also this guy, Hartley Henry in Barbados, aided and abetted by Alec Lawrence, decided to scuttle the decision of the Electoral Commission to have meaningful electoral reform. So that is the genesis. And I think while I'm on this, let me say that when you look at what's happening in this country, there are three people who are essentially controlling this country now, where this country goes. Controlling our Prime Minister, I would think. And that is Hartley Henry, Anthony Hayden, Anthony Astafan. There might be others. But these are the three people who are, in my view, taking everything in consideration, who are directing our country at this point in time. One of them controls our money, our largesse. And I say again, is my considered view that this Labour Party government is not interested in electoral reform. Because if they were, they had ample opportunity to show that. They have had recommendations made by observer missions from CARICOM, from the OAS, from the Commonwealth Secretariat. They've had joint CARICOM OAS missions who have come here to advise them on electoral reform and the way forward. They engaged a consultant called Pauline West to advise them on electoral matters and electoral reform. None of these bits of advice, comprehensive as they were, found their way into implementation. The Electoral Commission itself in 2018 embarked upon an exercise to clean the list. The government used their financial clout, their hold on the purse of the country, to ensure that exercise did not happen. It was an exercise which would have significantly contributed to the cleaning of the electoral list. They blocked it. And so they went to Mr. Byron, a man that everybody accepts is an eminent jurist, former president of the CCJ and other high positions, president of or Chief Justice of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. They gave him terms of reference for this exercise. And somewhere along the way, they modified those terms of reference to allow him not only to make recommendations, but to put those recommendations in legal form. So Byron examined, had consultations across the country. We have the reports of the extent of the consultations. I believe, and I agree with what the underlying sentiments I heard from Dr. Andre, that Mr. Byron allowed himself to be swayed too far into the direction of responding and accepting what the other side, the Labour Party, wanted with respect to residency. The constitution of our country talks about, and we hear people talking, as Mr. Skerry talking about disenfranchisement, and he doesn't want people to be disenfranchised. Our constitution, the methods and the procedure by which our people are enfranchised is by registering, by getting on the register. First, you must be a Commonwealth citizen, a Dominican citizen of 18 years or over. So once you're a citizen by birth, you are in the Commonwealth country and Dominica, you can, of course, remove yourself as a citizen. You can do that. You can't change your age. Your age is 18 or over, you qualify. But what puts you in an enfranchised position is your registration. You have to be read. That's the Constitution, the highest law in the land. It says for you to be able to vote, you must be registered. And significantly, after you've attained the age of 18, you're a Commonwealth citizen or citizen of Dominica. What is crucial in terms of effecting this registration of disenfranchisement, giving you disenfranchisement, is your residency in Dominica. Okay? You must be registered in Dominica for a period of, in a polling district, and that is in Dominica for a period of 3 months. Residency. That is what enfranchises you. So if you therefore move away from a position where you're a resident in Dominica, then you haven't disenfranchised yourself. And it is my view and view of others that this is the residency that must be the basis, the key, the cornerstone of your enfranchisement. So I agree wholeheartedly with the recommendation, the position that was first suggested by Sir Dennis Byron in that report, that residency is what, or your lack of residency, your removal from the position of being a resident, that would require, that would make for you to be removed from the register of voters. I believe Sir Dennis allowed himself to go too far in being persuaded by the Labour Party that he should change his original thinking to one where we are talking about absence from Dominica. It should not be absence from Dominica that determines whether you are on the register. It should be residency. And I am recommending, and the organization I'm associated with is recommending, proposing that that is what should be contained in the legislation which goes to the Parliament. That a name should be removed from the list if the person dies, or if the person is no longer resident in Dominica, and residency would be defined in the appropriate section of the Act. So that is very clear. Okay. So what are the elements? And it's important for our people to pay attention to this situation with electoral reform. In the end, it is not Sir Dennis Byron, it is not Dr. Andre, Edison James, Roosevelt Skerritt, or whoever that will determine, that should determine what we get as the final product. It should be all of us collectively, the people of this country collectively. So it's important for us to be informed. The essential elements of the electoral reform of which we speak is that the list should be cleaned. That is, the names of people who are not qualified, who are no longer eligible to be on the list, those names should be removed. And those, of course, will be people who have died, people who have removed themselves from the residency in Dominica, and people who have been disqualified because they've been involved in bribery and cheating and electoral offenses and so on. So the cleansing of the list, as I said, the Electoral Commission has authority under the law to clean the list. It embarked upon an exercise to do that in 2008. It was scuttled by on the initiative of Anthony Estefan and embraced by Roosevelt Skerrit. Then there's the question of the use of ID cards. It is instructive that Tony Estefan, in that clipping you played, Mr. Gregoire, suggested that Mr. Ling Ping Jing can come from China, land here for 2 days, and then he can get involved in our electoral process here. That must be wrong. And for anybody to be promoting that and glorifying that, that is a person who is not, as he should be, a friend of Dominica and a friend of our democratic process. ID cards for voting with fingerprints. Now remember, we are talking about ID cards for voting, not national ID cards. That is the proposal. There has been a talk about whether it should be ID cards or national ID cards or voting cards. It's ID cards for voting, voter ID cards with fingerprints in them. I'm aware that the Labour Party seem to have a problem somewhere along the line with the fingerprinting or the biometrics being included in the ID cards. But we affirm that they should be, the cards should have available the fingerprinting or some of the biometric, but fingerprints. The other elements of the electoral reform has to do with campaign financing. It is unacceptable for one party using the resources of the state to be able to have this voluminous amount of money, which it can use to bribe people. And let's make no mistake about it. They're bringing in of people from overseas with a view to getting them to vote for you, either directly, intentionally, or unintentionally, on the basis that they'll vote for you, is bribery. That is contained in Halsby's Laws of England, and I think several judicial decisions have made that very clear. So again, for a senior counsel to be suggesting that should be set aside and that's not bribery, it is wrong. So campaign financing, where there's a level playing field, is important in this campaign financing arrangement. And clearly, if one has to, the way we seek to offer ourselves for elective office is to persuade people about our plans and programs, what our philosophy is, and so on. And you cannot do that effectively on a one-on-one. We're going to meet everybody in the country. So the media is almost indispensable in getting your message across. It is therefore unfair. And remember, elections have to do with being free and fair. Free and fair. And it is unacceptable for one group of people to have access to the media to the exclusion of another set of people. And when I talk about media here, I don't think we should be concentrating only on the state-owned media, DBS. I think the legislation should provide for equality and fairness with respect to all media operating in Dominica. And I say this on the basis that our Constitution prohibits discrimination against anyone on the basis of political considerations. And if you're going to discriminate against one party in favor of the other, you are discriminating against me on political grounds, and the Constitution prohibits that. I'm saying the other media houses other than DBS, the fact that they have to pay a license to broadcast, it is because they're using a facility of the state, the airwaves. It belongs to the state. And you're using the state's facility, then your service should be available to everybody in the state in this political context, providing they're willing to pay your fee. So they must have access. And it is not a question of you telling one side, yes, I will allow you on my station, but you must pay $500 while you allow the other side on the station, and that other side pays $100. There must be equality. And also the question of bribery and treating. Bribery and treating is prohibited by the election laws, the House of Assembly Elections Act. This Labour Party administration attempted to legalize bribery and treating when it sought to go to the Parliament with an amendment to the House of Assembly Act, in which it provided that it was stating that for the avoidance of doubt, bringing people from overseas is not bribery and treating. I think they got the message when Dominicans put their foot down and decided, no, we're not accepting that. And that should be an indication to Dominicans that if we stand up, they will listen. If we stand up, they will listen. And it comes down in the final analysis to the people of this country standing up. Okay, none of us is interested in violence. None of us is interested in violence, but all of us should do whatever we can and what we must do to not create a situation where you push the population into violence. And Mr. G, I see you always in this promotion. You ask whether it will require mass movement to get the electoral reform happening. It may require mass movement. And once that movement starts, sometimes it's difficult to control that movement. Let us not get there. And I'm appealing to everybody who has a voice, who has influence, to stand up and be counted. When some years ago they were going to impose a woman on us as president who was not acceptable to the population, I don't think it was the opposition forces who prevented that appointment from happening as president, of that woman as president. It was the intervention of people who had the ears of the prime minister, who told him, no, that's a bridge too far. You can't have this woman on us as president. So similarly, those people who have the ears of the prime minister, those leaders, I hear people talk about who they are. They know themselves. Talk to the prime minister. Talk to the government. Tell them that this electoral reform, if they continue to do what they're doing and to prevent the people from having free and fair elections, it will not end well, notwithstanding Navy SEALs and notwithstanding snipers. We see what's happening in St. Vincent now. Navy SEALs and snipers have not prevented what's happening in St. Vincent. We do not want that in our country. So let us do what we have to do to ensure that that doesn't happen. The CCG has told us that the elections of 2019 were a sham. The CCG also commented, and it's something we've not paid attention to, that when you have these sham elections, then you can end up with an illegitimate government, and you can end up with a country that is subject to violence and disturbance and upheavals. That is what the CCJ comment also says. We must go and look at it again and see that. That is a warning. So if this government, this administration, directed, aided and abetted by the people who control them, continue in this vein, this is where we're going to be heading. So the CCJ commented that the elections were a sham. They were not free and fair, but he said they were tainted, and the election should not be held under those terms again, under those same conditions. So I believe that Mr. Skerritt was embarrassed by the CCJ ruling comments. I think when he engaged with colleagues and other people as he goes around the world, he would get the sense that they would be looking at him, as ye on the side, as a person emerging from an election which was a sham. So he wanted to obliterate that stigma, that stain, that hence you had this sham election which took place in 2022, where he said he was going to reset. And you see a reset, and there's only one new person that came into the cabinet. Well, 2 or 1.5. The Minister of Agriculture, the 1.5 the Minister for Housing, because 1.5, because the half was there, 1 foot in, 1 foot out before, was not a minister, but was part of the cabal, if you like. So we had a reset, but the same people who were there before the reset are the same people who were back in positions. So that was a con game that happened there. Okay, so the CCJ committee, but the OAS, which monitored the sham 2020 elections, also commented that the rules under which this arrangements under which those elections were held should not happen again as well. So the 2022 election was also a sham. So it is for us as Dominicans to stand up and to insist that we have free and fair elections. But there's something saying, there's some chorus I heard, the answer is blowing in the wind. Here, the answer is blowing with the people of Dominica. On the question, I think Mr. Gio invited me to say something about the airport.
Yes, I wanted you to make some comments on the airport.
I believe, and I was saying to somebody today, that there are a number of things that point to this airport being a kind of Layo River type encounter, engagement, where from the outset, people see it as a means of siphoning off money with no intention of bringing this thing to completion. Because I do not understand how we can start off where we are now without a fundamental exercise like the geotech study being done. I spoke to a geologist today who was pointing out the folly of embarking upon the construction of an international airport without the geotech studies having been done. The United Workers' Party, having received the mandate from the people in 1995 to build an international airport, because that was first front and center in our manifesto, and I believe in the true Westminster principle. If you present your manifesto to the people and the people accept you and voted you in as the ruling administration, then you have a mandate. You must, though, operate within the laws, the rules, the regulations, and in consultation with the people. So here's what happened. When we, United Workers' Party, embarked upon the construction of an international airport, what did we do? We did all the relevant studies. We had a market, and we had an airport inventory. We had the market analysis and forecast. We had an economic benefit analysis. We had a facility requirement study. What were the facilities required? The runway alignment analysis and the site analysis, an environmental analysis, a land use analysis. That is where the question of geotech came in. The land use analysis, the plans for the airport, the plans and so on, a construction cost estimate, a financial analysis, an implementation plan. And importantly, these studies were accessible to the public. We had at least two mini engagements with the public at the Public Training Center in Roseau. And we had an all-island massive encounter, public engagement with the people at Londonderry. And we invited all and sundry to be there. Unfortunately, I heard a comment by Athet and Mate a few days ago suggesting that we were going to take lands, agricultural lands, extending from way up in the heights of Wesley down to bottom Wesley and across to Woodford. That is not true. We were never going to be involved in taking lands at bottom Wesley and these places. And we actually allocated lands otherwise to assist those people who were involved in farming, who were still interested in and continuing in farming somewhere else. And importantly, we paid everybody for their lands. So at this point in time, what I'm seeing going on at Wesley there, and let me say, I was there today. I took the opportunity to go around Wesley today, and people should see what's happening there. Without the geotech study, I am at a loss to understand how they can have decided on the design and also the cost of the airport. So those things raise a red flag to me as to whether we have on our hands the Layo River Greystone type project, where it is my view, based on evidence, that there was never any intention to build a hotel at Layo River. It was a scheme by which those people who had invested in the Layo River were able to get their money back. That is on the public record. That was stated. Okay. And when I look at the situation, there was no arrangement in the first contract between the government and Greystone to build a hotel. That is the first agreement, which was dated 1991. In 1993, there was a second agreement. That agreement provided for the construction of an airport, but it also provided that if the developer did not build it, the government would have to take it over and build it. But there was no arrangement for the money which would have been collected at the time to have been passed over to the government. In the end, what we have at Layo is a lot of concrete covered under bush and trees and no hotel, but the people have gone away with at least $10 million. I fear that in a situation now where one man is controlling our money, one man, Anthony Hayden, is controlling our money, I fear that we may have a situation where people feel that they can spend $100 million, $200 million up there in order to be able to walk away with $500 million. I hope I'm wrong, but that is where I see it at this point in time. I agree with you, the comment you made, Mr. Gregoire. If we were building an airport, if we're embarking upon the construction of an international airport at this time, we would have to take in consideration the fact that aircrafts now are of a different design and they can operate on much shorter runways, and that would be a consideration. Thank you very much.
And thank you so much for that, Mr. James. Yeah, I really thought I wanted you to make a comment on this airport thing. I hope Dr. Andrew will also be able to make one or two comments himself on it. But the reason why I wanted you to comment, because I'm aware that there were, I think, 13 studies that were done under the EWP administration for that airport. And certainly, I mean, all of the people who paid for the land, I did not hear at the time anyone complaining, as I'm hearing now, of people who are not getting paid for their land and people who have been asked to move out of their homes without any other place to go. Because some of those persons who have been given land, I understand some of them are complaining that they have not yet received titles to those pieces of land. Therefore, if you don't have a title, how are you going to take a loan to build on those pieces of land? Even if you're given a home, a house, a unit, and you don't have a title to it, you cannot take a loan on it. Even the question of the insurance of the house, if you have, if there's bad weather, storm is coming, you can't even insure the house because it is not yours.
Sheridan, let me just make one other observation. Then and now, it was clear to everybody, it was in the public domain as to who the consultants were, who were advising us and who were engaged with us. It was Planning and Stanley and Planning, right? That was in the public domain. Interestingly, though, you would find during the development of the proposal and so on, and engagement with the public and information to the public, Julius Timothy, you would hear Julius Timothy out there talking about the international airport. He was the minister responsible for planning, minister for finance. Norris Prevost, you would hear him out there talking about international airport. He was the minister for tourism, and tourism is an important aspect of the construction and the availability of an international airport. You would hear Earl Williams, minister of communications and works. It's a works project. You would hear Peter Carbon, who was the Minister for Agriculture. There was very much a good bit of an agricultural impact out there, and he was the PAL rep for the area. Nowadays, the only person you hear talking from the government standpoint about international airport is Mr. Skerritt. This is be all and end all of everything. That is an important difference in observation, I thought.
Yeah, certainly. And Dr. Andre, just before I go to you, let me just alert Lambi. Lambi, I think we want to take the people's calls. So I would ask you if you could give them the numbers and so that we can stand by. So as we go ahead, I mean, whenever the calls come, we'll just take the call. So please go ahead and give the numbers.
Good evening, everybody. The numbers to this program, the Global View, are as follow. 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257. These are the local numbers. The overseas or international number is 305-432-9624. Let me run these one more time. 449-3095, 96 and 97, 616-4257. These are local numbers. 305-432-9624. That is the international number. Back to you, Mr. G.
Yes, so you can just interrupt us anytime. Just make me a sign that I can see clearly, Lambi. Once you have a call, we'll take the call. You want to take it now?
Yes, we've got a call on the line. Caller, please go ahead.
Good night.
Good night.
I can't believe people put Skerritt there and Skerritt don't even nobody who decide for it alone. People must be hungry. And that is wrong. Mr. doing wrong already past. People are big mansion are building coffee. They don't know who building a coffee. They don't know. May God bless his soul. I listen on.
Thank you very much.
All right, Lambi, you want me to go ahead? So, okay, so you'll just interrupt us if you have a call. Dr. Andre, I also wanted to, get if your comments, if you could, on the airport thing. But Mr. James did sort of bring down this thing on electoral reform. He mentioned, for example, the cleaning of the list, which is a clear requirement. I mean, if you have all of the re-registration being done in Dominica, and everybody gets re-registered, it means that those people are dead cannot come back, cannot be on that list again. So only people who re-register would be on the list. So you'd have a clean voters list. That's one of the requirements that he mentioned there. The other thing is the voter ID cards, with biometric data. And that is so important. I believe that is key. I think that may be one of the recommendations that so Dennis made. I hope that it remains in there. I don't know whether the Labour Party will have any objections to it, but certainly I hope this is one of the recommendations that remains in there and passes into law. Then, of course, the question of campaign finance. The question is how much? Because we do have one or two countries that have that, and there's some examples. So we might want to start looking at really how much. Is it so much per elector? Is it $30 per elector in a constituency? We did have some figure, because otherwise, if you have some outrageous figure like $10 million, it means one party can get 10 million from crooks and criminals. The other party may not be able to get, and then they have a clear advantage. So there needs to be some kind of a unit that is pegged in there. And certainly there has to be the regulations and the law to enforce that, to ensure that people don't breach that law. So the campaign financing the regulations is very important, and the access to all media. I don't know what your comment is, but certainly I think access to all media, to all political parties, free access, or equal access rather to all media by all political parties, including GIS and so on. And then the question of eliminating bribery and treating, that is something that should be very clear. I mean, notwithstanding the comment we heard from this attorney before we started there, certainly it sounds so bad for anyone to try to go to parliament to legitimize bribery and cheating. And then, of course, let's bear in mind the CCJ's comments about the tainted elections, and that recommended that Dominica strongly suggested Dominica does not go into another election with the same system because it was tainted. The OAS also thought that we should not do it. So your further comments, Dr. Andre?
Well, let us start with the CCJ, because we have to understand the irony of all this discussion in terms of electoral reform, the CCJ. Whose decision was it to jettison the Privy Council and to embrace the CCJ? We had the option of having a referendum to decide that switch. We bypassed the requirement for a referendum. It was the political directorate who made that decision, aided and abetted by senior counsel. And hear what they're saying now about the CCJ. When the CCJ ruled against them, look at the comments that they've made. Recall the letter which the Attorney General wrote to the CCJ. Please explain your decision. Look at how they dealt with the CCJ's decision in terms of the decision to nullify pros, the charge laid against members of government. Look at the contempt they've shown. And these are folk who are talking about anti-colonial nonsense. Look at the contempt they've shown for indigenous institutions. Where is all this excitement and all this rhetoric about accepting and getting rid of the colonial structure and putting instead a Caribbean one? Look at how they dealt with it when made a decision based on legal precedent in terms of dealing with that decision of Glasgow. Is it Glasgow his name? Whatever, I don't know. I'm not his godfather. So these folks are picking and choosing. They're cherry picking what they want and what or who will support their respective positions. And you will only do so if you plan to circumvent, if you try to avoid all those principles of good governance that ensure that you have a working democracy. But I'll say one thing. The folks have made it clear that that's the last thing they want. Especially if they can get a pastor and a priest to sing their glories. What else do they want, Gasson? They are anointed. Their wrongdoing has been anointed. That is a very, very sad state of affairs. You know, because people's lives have been destroyed. You often talk about the civil service. There are a lot of good people in the civil service, qualified people, persons who have been shunned because they lack the ability to hold certain positions. But because that they have an uncle, a nenen, an auntie's child who doesn't support the directorate, and they are victimized through no fault of their own. Same thing could be said with some police officers or other persons. Can be said of persons who are not given any help. Not that they've done anything wrong, but because they are linked to somebody through no fault of their own. And for that, they must pay a price. So we cannot look at this business of electoral reform in some type of cocoon or vacuum. It is just a manifestation of a fundamental problem that is besieging Dominica. He said it's only the good people in Dominica who can summon the courage to set the ship of state right, to avoid it being dashed by the wonderful voices of the sirens, who will seduce. That's an interesting word in Dominica these days. Seduce the ship of state and make the captain steer it towards rocks that will destroy it and sink it. We're not talking about an iceberg, which is hidden, most of it is hidden under the sea. We're talking about something which is staring us in the face. This cannot be right. No amount of pontification by anyone can make it right. You can't buy enough perfume by Astephen to give it a sweet smell because it stinks to high heaven. And as I said, people in St. Vincent are not sitting back and become passive bystanders in their own destruction. Neither in Antigua, neither in St. Kitts. You know? No one can take any pride in this. You know the old saying, ill-gotten gains are seldom enjoyed, or they are enjoyed only for a short period of time. You know, life has taught us that is exactly the problem. You know, when we least expect it, something calamitous happens. Because if it is true that there's a divine being who controls everything, as the folks used to say growing up, bon Dieu back at Domi, Mr. G, he doesn't have a coconut fiber mattress like you. Doesn't sleep. So this is not idle rhetoric. This is not idle talking. This is crunch time. This is the last show I'm going to be in to talk about electoral reform, Gasson. There's nothing else we can say. That's right there. So that's my take. That's my contribution.
I was going to ask you a little bit about some of these cases and the St. Kitts situation, because you notice that Sir Byron is making recommendations, but those types of recommendations don't seem to exist in the laws of St. Kitts. And some of those cases, right? And some of it used to be, that's right, but they fixed them. And then some of these, you know, some of these cases that we're talking about, because I suspect before this thing is over, there'll be cases going to court. Just like in St. Vincent, you had cases going to court, and they prevailed, and the government is now trying to reverse the court decision. And the people say, no, we'll have none of it. We're not allowing you to take our money and to take us to another court to waste our money again. So instead of taking it, you could pay us the money. So I wanted, if you could, those cases.
we're allowing the folks to pay hot shots from Trinidad, for God's sakes, to prosecute a case which has no legal merit whatsoever. The case on incitement in terms of what happened in front of the ministry with a truck, you know, we're allowing that to happen. Some of these folk can't even get a decent case in Trinidad. If, God forbid, the disclosure, the evidence, the Crown's evidence is made open to the public, out of the dozens of witnesses, I wouldn't be surprised. There is no evidence, not a scintilla of evidence, that would support a charge of incitement. But we have paid some fellow, and he has his man Friday with him too. Free vacation in Dominica. Mountain chicken. Dashing. You know?
Yeah.
Living in a hotel. Look, Mr. James has a big fat book in front of him.
So James, you have something you want to add to that?
Yes, Sheridan. Taking off from where.
Don't forget, if you have a call, just make me a high sign, okay? Let's go, Mr.
Yes. Sheridan, this is the document that it says here: Criminal Investigation Department, Police versus Thompson Fontaine, Edison James, Lennox Linton, witness statements. Inspector George Theophil, offense incitement. This is the document which contains the witness statements. You see it, Sheridan? See the size of it?
If you have a document that thick, you should be able to tell us some of the evidence that is there.
Yeah, I missed you there. What did you say?
I was saying, if you have a document that is so thick, there should be some evidence that you might be able to point to that might exist in it.
Sheridan, there is not, believe me, there's not one person of the 74 people who are referenced here, not one of them said that Thompson Fontaine, Lennox Linton, or Edison James incited them or anybody. Not one. But this has been going on now for 6 years. Lennox Linton, for instance, Thompson Fontaine, all of us are in front of the court. And we have people being paid millions of dollars coming out of Trinidad to persecute us. A question was placed in the parliament the other day, asking the relevant minister to indicate the amount that had been spent on these lawyers from Trinidad. And with the assistance and I would say connivance of the speaker, the question was not answered because I suspect they're so embarrassed to deal with that question. But on the question, as we on bribery and treating and bearing in mind the voice note.
Before you go to that, let me ask you: do you yourself have any idea, any kind of a rough guesstimate as to how much might have been paid to these external attorneys for those cases?
I would say it should be in the region of $2 million.
You think it might be about $2 million?
Yes, I wouldn't be surprised. Okay, but as we on this treating and bribery matter, remember, Sheridan and your listeners and viewers, that the on this bribery, yes, that 3 Dominicans went before the court and charged the 15 ministers with the offense of bribery and treating with respect to the 2014 elections. The matter reached as far up as the CCJ when the 15 ministers were trying to suggest that they should not, before there was no case to answer. And the CCJ ruled that there was a case to answer and directed that the matter be held. The Prime Minister himself, through his lawyer, approached the DPP to ask that the case be null pros. The Prime Minister himself, through his lawyer, approached the DPP. And after the CCJ gave its ruling that the matter should be heard by the magistrate, the DPP null pros the matter. Remember also that the CCJ indicated that the 2017-2019 elections were tainted and future elections should not be held under those conditions. The government went on and held elections in 2022. Remember that the IPO took Mr. Skerrit to court saying that he was in breach of the relevant IPO Act. What happened? They went to the parliament and they dissolved the IPO. And in that new replacement legislation, they actually dog whistled to the new 3-man commission that they should discontinue the case against the Prime Minister. That is what we're dealing with. On the question of Mr. Astafan now telling people that the question of bringing in people from overseas is a matter that should not be regarded as bribery and treating. Here what the Halsbury's Laws of England, 4th edition, volume 15, paragraph 770, page 41 says, the unconditional payment or promise of payment to a voter of his traveling expenses is not bribery, but the payment or promise of payment to a voter of his traveling expenses on the condition expressed or implied that he would vote for a particular candidate is bribery. That is the law. And these guys are sitting there using our money, Sheridan. $71 million was the price tag for the 2019 election. $71 million of our money. Okay? That's what they're using. How can that be a free and fair elections? So when people talk about what the opposition is doing, what the opposition not doing, no, but nobody, no other group in this country, Sheridan and Dr. Andre, can win an election under these conditions in the absence of electoral reform. And that is where we have a problem. That's where we have issues. I just want quickly, while I'm on the floor, to say that the suggestion by Mr. Skerrit to have consultation after the final report from Mr. Byron has arrived, to have consultation engaging, he said he's already engaged the OAS and CARICOM and the Commonwealth to lead the consultation process on the Byron report is ridiculous, and it's just another delay tactic. It is our considered view again that once this legislation has come about, and Mr. Byron, who was paid $650,000 to advise us, and he advised that the final bit of legislation should be passed in the parliament in April, not me, April, that timetable should be stuck to. And once that happens, there's a confirmation process that must take place. They allow 6 months. The recommendation is that takes place over 6 months, maximum 9 months. That will take us to the end of December. And we reckon that by the first half of next year, there should be elections. And
let's take a quick call, Mr. James. I'll come back to you in a minute. Lambi, let's take a call.
Caller, thanks for being there. Go ahead with your call.
Good evening, Lambi. Good evening, Mr. James. And
good evening.
Dr. Andre, Mr. G, good evening.
Yes, good evening.
Yeah, listening to the program, you are just enter into the heart of the problem, or enter the crux of what is affecting us in Dominica. I would say the main issue, and that is I'm talking about law and order. Because, Mr. G, we all know our government consists of 3 branches. And the judiciary is a branch of the government that should be independent. And even if we disagree and we have a right to criticize the decision, we still have to uphold the advice or the decision or the rulings, because they are part of of our government, I say, with 3 branches we have. Now, when you have the highest branch or the highest court telling the people of Dominica, Mr. G, that we should not enter into another election with this tainted system, the laws, they are corrupt, they are not good for our democracy. We cannot get a fair result, Mr. G. And then Dominica ignores that and go into another election. It's like we are not upholding the law. That doesn't make any sense to me. The court says you cannot go into another election. There's no way Dominica should even accept to have another election. Mr. G, I just heard Honorable James talk about Mr. Scary, through his advisor, through his lawyers, go to the DPP, ask them to nullify press the case. And when the justices in the Caribbean court, the highest court, you know which one it is.
The CCJ.
This is the ask Anthony Astafan if they attempt to go to the DPP and ask, and he said no.
You lied.
And that is a deliberate lie, Mr. G. So what I'm saying is that there you have people that swear to take an oath and uphold the laws and the Constitution, Mr. G. And on every turn, they are ignoring the laws and the Constitution. We cannot have a proper democratic system in Dominica. That is why the electoral reform is so important, because it always going back, as Mr. James said, going back to election. And that is the consequences of election. When you elect people that will ignore the laws, people that take an oath, swear to uphold the laws and the Constitution of the state. And they are the ones violating it, Mr. G. It's time for the people to act. I don't see no other way out of it, because they are not listening to the CCJ. They are not listening to the voice of the people. So the people have to take the democratic system in their hands and defend it by any means necessary. Thank you. I'm listening.
Thank you so much. Dr. Andre, I wanted to go to you and Mr. James, and I'll probably come back to you after Dr. Andre, because, you know, Dr. Andre, when I listened to Mr. James telling us that it is possible that attorneys in representing the government, the prosecution, these attorneys come from outside and they may have been paid some $2 million. And this case is pending for a few years now. What, 5, 6 years?
6 years, 6
years. Now, and every time you go to court, we seem to be hearing that it is postponed for some reason. I don't know if it's a lack of evidence or not, the state not prepared, the procedures not prepared. But wouldn't you say, in your considered opinion, isn't it about time that the attorneys for the defendants, like Dr. Fontaine and Mr. James and Mr. Linton and so on, that they move the court to throw out that case for under prosecution? Because there's obviously no evidence.
Well, first of all, and what can I say? First of all, let me give an example. I mean, the case has been pending for 6 years. 6 years, 6 12 is 72 the last time I checked. 72 months. I can tell you that we have rules in Canada that if an offense is what we call an indictable offense, it's in the Superior Court, then the maximum amount of tolerable delay is, except for exceptional circumstances, is 30 months, as in 30, 2.5 years, 30 months from the date the charge or charges have been laid to the end of the trial. 30 months. So I know what would have happened to that case. He was here. And there's no doubt in my mind that, being in one of the busiest jurisdictions in Ontario, the case would have been before the court one way or the other. But bear in mind one thing. I mean, I may be wrong about this, but I don't think I am. The question is, does the magistrate have a residual discretion to step in and say enough is enough? I'm going to stay these charges. I'm going to dismiss them for want of prosecution. How much time is enough time? These are criminal charges over the heads of persons who are presumed to be innocent. Long is too long. Should these charges be allowed to remain against these folk indefinitely with nothing happening? The disclosure of that big fat book Mr. Jim lifted up apparently was delivered years ago. There's no new evidence. No. I don't know. Well, let's say that unless somebody's persuaded to change his statement, I wouldn't be surprised there's absolutely no evidence in that big fat book that directly ties any of the defendants to the charge of incitement. On the contrary, if I remember correctly, Lennox on the church sometime after 4 was telling people, go home, go to your home. The violence occurred in the evening. I remember distinctly. Thompson Fontaine on the before the violence on the
radio.
Q95, saying, or people tell him, go get what's his name, Joshua. You know, if I recall correctly, also the chief police officer was involved in maintaining the peace. Hardly gave a statement. Not an iota of evidence that can link any of these folk directly or indirectly, directly or circumstantially, to what happened that evening. But you're paying some goddamn lawyer from Trinidad. You see, because we believe once the lawyer is from abroad, he's some big shot. Well, anyway, I'll refrain myself. You know, but we have money, we are flush. Mr. James talk about 2 million. I don't know if that's true, but didn't we pay someone called, what's his name, Zampoli, 30 million? And his fellow sellers more than that? Isn't that just part of the pattern? That we have all this money to pay these folk who have absolutely no interest, no ties to the community, who have no desire to invest any money in Dominica.
But Andrew, let's take a call.
Good evening, caller. Please go ahead.
Good night, Dominica. Thank you, sir, for receiving my call. It's an honor calling to that talk show. It's a real thing. I wish all Dominicans in Dominica around the world listen to that show, you know, listen to something of our lifetime, something are going to determine whether we save Dominica or not. I have a question, and I really wish you all answer that tonight. Financing of the international airport, so-called international airport. I don't understand how we going to sell passport. Number one, how much passport we have to sell to collect $1 billion? Secondly, how can we give somebody to sell our passport to build an airport? In return, when the airport build, we have to pay him back that money. That money belongs to him when he used the state resources to raise the money. Mr. James said something earlier on. He see Lai River Hotel. I used to work Lai River Hotel. I see firsthand what happened in Lai River Hotel. But I see something similar to those people that he's giving passports to sell. They come out with nothing. He will give them passports to sell. And in the end, the hotel, whatever they construct out of that money, belong to them. I don't understand how some people could have so much privilege, whereas other poor people have to go to the bank and make ends. I mean, that is the biggest corruption. That alone is enough for Dominicans to get so mad to kick these guys out of government. You know. When you think of it, it is corruption to the highest level. Try to explain that to Dominicans for them to really understand how that can really be done, for a man to sell in your product and telling you in return he's going to use your product to do something for him, and in the end you have to pay him back with your same product. I mean, come on. And these guys are not even Dominicans. I mean, when you think of it, you have to wonder what's wrong with Dominicans. Secondly, I don't need tariffs to fight for my voting rights overseas. Tariff I afford to give Dominicans a proper health care. I don't need tariff to emphasize that he's fighting for our voting rights. We already have our voting rights in overseas already. So tell Skerrit what he's doing is just for his personal self and not the interest of Dominicans. God bless Dominica. Thank you.
Bless you as well. Mr. James, I wanted to just put this to you. You see, the caller made two very good interventions there. I mean, certainly the question of the cost of that airport, you already made the statement that how can you arrive at a cost without having completed all of the studies, especially the geotechnical studies? How can you arrive at a cost? How can you arrive at a design? Obviously, you cannot. And I seem to have heard one of the people who was on that committee or that corporation, the airport development company, saying that no, they have not done all the studies because some of the studies were done by the United Workers' Party for a site within a certain proximity of it, so they don't need to do all those studies over again. And they did so that the geotechnical studies are not complete because the holes that they had to bore were not all done yet. How can you? And then, of course, let's look at that price. Somebody has pulled a figure of what? Is it 1 billion or 1.2 billion out of a hat somewhere? Just like probably was done in the Lyle River Hotel situation. But don't we know that there is a track record that every time we do a major project in Dominica, we go to Parliament and provide estimates in a budget. And then we come back 3 months later and ask for supplementary estimates to the equivalent amount. If we first ask for 30 million, well, I don't know what they had asked for in the hospital in Marigot, but then you come back and ask for another 13 million. Is that an indication that we might be saying, okay, the airport costs 1.2 billion now, and then in 6 months we might say, well, it really is not 1.2, it might be 2.4. And then the question from the caller, Mr. James, I hope you can address that because he asked us to address it. Why is there absolutely nothing being said about how this thing is being done? How many passports are going to be sold? Who's going to be selling those passports? What is going to be? There's absolutely no information about this. Maybe you can clarify some of that for us, Mr. James.
Well, Sheridan, remember the Kempinski Hotel that we have information from one of the players involved there that two of the players walked away with $20 million US each, I think it is. And this guy who was the squealer, he was squealing for his 17 or $19 million or something like that. So we have that example. We have the example of the Lyle River Hotel.
But that matter went to court. That matter, I think, went to court.
Yes,
So,
in the court.
Wasn't in court.
Let me tell you, if you're going into Wesley from the Marigot end, when you pass the St. Andrews High School junction, the Northeast Comprehensive Junction, you go up the hill, there's a popular place there we call by Druff. You can either go straight on the main road, or you can turn right, or you can turn left. If you go straight on, you will encounter the area that is identified for the construction of the airport. Okay. Now, the question is, how do you get from the southern side of this airport location to the north? How do you go from Melville Hall or from Marigot to Woodford Hill of Portsmouth? So when you reach by Druff, if you go straight on to the main road, then I understand somewhere there there's a proposal to do a tunnel under what would be the aerodrome, the tunnel. Yeah. There's another suggestion that you may have to turn right and go down to Batiste and go down to the edge to Bottom Wesley and come around the edge of the airstrip, or you may turn left by Druff and go up through Mamre or somewhere up there and go across to Woodford Hill. So up to this point in time, there's no decision as to which one of those routes you take. So right there now, even it's a relatively small cost item, but you do not know which route you're going to take, so you do not know what costings you have. Okay, and so that is, and what the caller said about the financing arrangement. As you heard there, we did a financial analysis and we indicated how we were going to fund the airport. Okay, there is no financial analysis that we've seen. And Sheridan, also, I said earlier that a government in office will have a mandate from the people to do certain things, but you must operate within the law. The government in this regard is completely out of the Planning Act. The Planning Act makes certain dictates, and the government is completely out of work, completely ignoring the Planning Act. They ignore all laws in the country. That is not good. That is not good. So the financing arrangement, the economic analysis, the geotech analysis, Nothing that is done. But I'll tell you something. If you go past the Northeast Funeral Home and you go up into the area past the former residence of Ghana Didier, you will see a massive city being built up there. I am told that there are 2 bunkers there. I'm not sure. But you'll see a massive city being built up there. Okay? So I don't know what that tells you. But I've heard talk. So it is for the government now, Sheridan, and for the people to ask the government. And the government is Mr. Skerritt alone, because as I said earlier, unlike in our situation where you had 4 or 5 ministers from different times speaking about the airport from different aspects, depending on their portfolio, only Mr. Skerritt speaks about the airport. So we should urge Mr. Skerritt, beg him, beseech him, come to the public. It's a major public project, and explain to the public, expose to the public what it is that you're proposing there. And Mr. Grant, who is the PAL rep for the area, he's the Minister for Communications and Works. He's the immediate past Minister for Agriculture. If you go in the Wesley area beyond where they've put the houses there for the relocation, you will see how agriculture has been decimated in that area. I mean, I knew Wesley and that area at the back of my hand. You see agriculture. I was there this afternoon. Agriculture decimated. So am I inviting Mr. Grant to come to the public, urge Mr. Skerritt to come to the public and explain to us what that project is about.
Well, I can certainly understand how Mr. Peter Carbon is feeling now, because I know he was very, very concerned about the agriculture in Dominica when he was Minister for Agriculture. And even now, I know he's very concerned about it. But Dr. Andre...
One other thing, when Mr. Sheridan, I vow to put that on the table, to say to Dominicans and say to Mr. Grant and say to the Prime Minister and to say to the Minister of Finance, in a short while, if we do not pay attention, the road between the airport and Wesley will be completely cut off. Just at the point opposite the former airport manager's house, there's probably around 3 feet of land between the road, the surface of the road, the carriageway, and a steep drop into the sea. In a short while, that road will drop into the sea. So I'm asking the Prime Minister, the Minister of Communications and Works, and whoever to pay attention to that danger which is lurking there.
And thanks for putting that call out. Dr. Andre, I'm a little bit, it's a mystery really. Why is there so much secrecy about the financial analysis for that airport? Why is there so much secrecy about the financing, the sources and the uses of funds? How are those funds going to come about? How many, we know they're talking about selling passports, but how many passports are going to have to be sold to raise $1 or $2 billion? And then what length of runway are you going to actually have? What kind of plans and designs are you going to actually have? We have no idea now exactly what is happening. You want to unmute your mic so that
all these are legitimate questions, but all these questions constitute together an indictment of what's happening. I mean, this is probably potentially the biggest development project that we can undertake, given the cost, the implications, whether the appropriate environmental studies have been done, whether there's been economic reports trying to get a sense as to how much traffic did you expect, how viable it is, what plans are put in place to sustain a certain threshold in terms of passengers coming and going, what infrastructure being put in place. Is there a Marigot Hospital? I mean, I don't know. I heard it's a old hotel. I mean, I don't know. Is it open? Are they making paracetamol there? Or are they making banana pie there? Is it a functioning hospital? These are legitimate questions, because all that, quite frankly, are basic requirements in terms of an international airport and the standards and what is required in terms of any emergency and so on and so forth. It's a vai-ki-vai attitude and approach to this whole business. But the saddest part of it, the most uncomfortable part of it, the inconvenient truth is that we as a society, we are haunted by the fact that there's no interest in the airport per se. There is an interest in how much money can be made from that project. That is the ultimate and the unkindest cut of all. The significance of the airport is not with respect to enhancing or promoting Dominica's well-being. It is a project which may well be measured by the extent or how much money could be laundered by the undertaking of this project. That is the most serious problem with this whole thing. Because let's face it, it's no secret that the funds which are going to be used, it has been said quite often, are proceeds of sale of passports, which should be in the consolidated fund. But you remember what Zampoli told us? The net proceeds of sale are being siphoned and placed and deposited in mysterious funds in Europe and then moved until their whereabouts become unknown. It's no secret. The fellow who is in charge of this, MB, the fellow who pretends to be a Canadian, I bet he fits the profile of all these shadowy figures that become rich on Dominica's money. Before they became involved, they were penniless. Now he's fabulously wealthy. You can say that of Zampoli. You can say that on the other investment in the so-called Kempinski. Look at the monstrosity at Picard. Huge concrete slabs of sitting in the midst of verdant greenery. A stain on the visage of Dominica. But if that is the justification for the airport, how much money can be laundered, how much kickbacks can be gotten and received, then obviously it's doomed to failure. I mean, don't ask me, what do I know? I have no business experience. My most successful business was the building of a fall cage in my mother's backyard when I was a teenager. But all the experts tell you, the engineers, that many of the projects undertaken around Roseau, for example, one of the bridges, the declared cost was 18 million. The experts told you, no, it should not have cost more than 11, including the Speaker of the House, if my memory serves me right. Where's the money going? Is it buried in one of the cemeteries or in the Roseau cemetery? As in the good, the bad, and the ugly? Where is it? We know where is it. That's why we have mysterious structures sprouting out like Zeb all over Roseau. That's why says nobody knows, nobody sees. That's why we have during the election cycle, we have every band, every whatever in Dominica given thousands of dollars to play all over the place with no limits. I haven't seen it raining money as yet. Probably it is, I don't know. But it just appears miraculously. And there are certain persons who will not connect the dots because all of a sudden they're deaf and they're dumb. But we'll pay the price.
Somebody just sent me a little note, Dr. Andre, and it says that 4,400 passports at 2020 prices, approximately EC 227,000 per passport. So suggesting that 4,400 passports at 227,000 is what will yield the 1 billion EC dollars that is being suggested. So basically around 4,400 passports. I mean, isn't that a lot of passports to sell? I mean,
it's a lot, but the whole point is, where's the money going?
Already sold?
Well, I personally believe that many have already been sold, But the proceeds of sale, as I said, they're not being deposited legally where they should be in the consolidated fund. They've been diverted. And that explains why every disciple seems to be flushed with money, building houses here, building over there, buying up land all over the place. You know, it's no secret. You know, this is not rocket science. Everybody knows and everybody sees. You know, and as I said, and that has transformed itself into a certain type of attitude, a certain type of arrogance, a certain type of conceit, a certain type of disdain for hardworking people, a certain type of contempt for persons who are making their living through the sweat of their brow. Remember what they said about Edward Oliver LeBlanc at his funeral? It will never happen to me. When I get out of office or when I'm in office, I will not make the same mistake as Edward Oliver LeBlanc. That is the philosophy that is animating some of these folk. And unfortunately, the only persons who appear not to be seeing it are those who regard themselves as the intellectual Pharisees of Dominica in 2023. And that is the saddest indictment of all. There are many good people out there. And to be quite frank with you, it's not everyone who remains silent who quite frankly supports this. Many persons may not speak out publicly, but they support the fight for democracy in other ways. So we should not just condemn everyone across the board. There are persons making contributions, you know, but we have to create the enabling environment to make people understand and realize it is time that my voice become heard, because my voice has meaning. My voice carries a certain degree of respect and resonance. Persons will think twice when through my words or actions they see me disassociating myself from this travesty of good governance. And that is where we are now.
Mr. James, I thought I'd go back to you on this, you know, because I have another little quote there from someone saying, okay, so you remember I asked a question that if it's 4,400 on top of what we've already sold, and you know, and so this person is saying we sold 23,764 passports between July 1st, 2016 and June 30th, 2020. So that's a considerable number of passports. Now, if Mr. James, as you mentioned earlier, if you look closely at the Lai River Hotel model or the Kempinski Hotel model, I mean, we noticed the Kempinski situation, the agents got quite a considerable amount of fees out of that. I think you tried to put, you did an analogy where you said it might be a case of spending 200 million on the proposed project and then people be able to get away with 500 million. Do you want to make a further comment on any of this, considering that we're now, it seems so uncertain what the financial analysis is. It seems so uncertain what the real cost is. We know we have a history of always going back to Parliament for supplementary estimates. And is it not likely that we will be told later on that the cost of the airport is probably more like $2 billion? Would you care to make some more comments on that?
Well, I said earlier, you know, Sheridan, that elections have consequences. This government is of the view, this regime is clearly of the position that it will never lose elections, and therefore it has no obligation, no desire, no need to be open and transparent with the people of this country, that it can do what it wants because it will never be brought to heel. That is the significance of this electoral reform. That's why we have to tie these two things in, you know, that so long as they can bribe, so long as they can have this money to spend $71 million on elections, so long as they can have our passport money, so they can build apartments here, there, and everywhere, deepening the poverty of our country. Because, you know, there's this notion that they would like to leave with us, that they are doing such a wonderful job in building these houses. But you have to build these apartments because of the level of poverty that's in the country. I am sure there's no one who would not prefer to be able to build his house on land that is his, that he can have his backyard, little backyard operations and so on. He has a family around him, as opposed to having to be shuttled into a high-rise flat and living on top of other people. Okay, so every time you see these houses going up, these apartments going up, is a further reflection of the deepening poverty in the country, that people cannot afford to look after themselves. I once had to take issue with a minister who was boasting about them having increased the number of paupers on the list. And I was saying, but what kind of thing is that? You know? So this question of the money, remember Lennox Linton told us that $4 billion of our passport money was missing. What has been the response to that? The response was Mr. Skerritt saying that when the finance people will put the figures together, Mr. Linton would be put to shame. That is several years ago. The finance people are still working on the figures because we've not seen them, okay? And they're running away from this. So that figure is there, $4 billion they've collected, and that was missing somewhere. They've been bringing in some tazata because as the economy gets tighter, they are asking their controller, Anthony Hayden, to allow them to get, by the way, I'm taking the liberty to call his name now because we are not supposed to call his name in the parliament. I'm not in the parliament now, but remember, Joseph Isaac has banned the calling of Anthony Hayden's name in the parliament. A man who is playing such a pivotal role in our country. He has his own PS. He signed the agreement at the Windsor Park for the construction of the airport. It wasn't with Mr. Skerritt he signed it, you know. You just reflect on who he signed it with. So here you have a situation where that figure has been put out there by Mr. Linton. It has never been challenged. And so when we say that they can, when this person tells you that they can sell passports and collect the $1 billion, that's what they will do. But because of the electoral system, the lack of electoral reform, and the ability to manipulate and to bribe and to cheat, okay, they have no sense and no obligation to be transparent with people. So they'll continue to take our money. And we are all going to continue to be dependent on the government, on the one-man government. Remember, and I say one-man government. And I'm saying that in an informed way, because when, what's his name, the chap who's been identified as one of the presidential candidates, I think is Austria, when he said to us that the cabinet on 2 occasions took decisions to build a official residence for the prime minister. And when Mr. Skerritt came, he chalvier. Is that what it is? That's the expression chalvier. Remember, I'm from Margot.
Something like that.
Okay. He chalvier the decisions. So it is a one-man government. Okay. So that is what you have. Therefore, election has consequences. That is why we cannot divorce the electoral reform situation we're talking about from the governance of this country. And
let me just challenge you on this a little bit, Mr. James. I want to be very clear what you're saying. I think you are telling us tonight that we must make the connection between proper electoral reforms that will yield free and fair elections in Dominica. Otherwise, we're going to continue to have very poor governance. We're going to have projects where people cannot tell us all of the financial analysis of those projects. And there is inadequate accountability and transparency and integrity in terms of all of the institutions that are the pillars of our democracy. So you're saying that unless we have these electoral reforms and free and fair elections, people's human rights and their civil liberties will continue to be breached. And you're saying that when we do those kinds of projects like the Lai River and so on, and the Noni Airport, you're saying vast amounts of our local resources from the sale of passports will go by way of fees to people who we don't know. Is that what you're telling us? And
yes.
Therefore, it's important for us to get serious about the business of electoral reform.
Yes, And I'm further saying that the judiciary will be decimated. The courts will take decisions based on evidence before them, and those decisions, to the extent that the directorate, political directorate, are not happy with those decisions, they will frustrate those decisions, and we'll have no redress. We will continue to.
Let's take a quick call from Lambi. You still have a call there, Lambi?
Yes. Good evening, caller. Thanks for joining us. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, good evening, citizens.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah. I have some observations. One from Mr. A little correction from for George Andre. That's the second time I hear him say that the bridge that was recently built for 18 million. And he said only 18 million. But I want to remind him that there was a supplementary also, because I would mention our supplementary. There was a supplementary for that bridge in Parliament for over $3 million. So in fact, the bridge cost over $21 million. Because sometimes I heard you mention that.
Okay.
And second, with Mr. James and the fingerprint, I don't think it's a thing that people should trust, especially with this government, to give these people our biometric data for fingerprints, because we can control much that's happening in Dominica already, much as to control a computer system that should be protecting our biometric data, because I think it's dangerous. I already observed too that when the immigration and computer system was installed at Melville Island Airport, it was installed by Chinese people.
Okay.
I wanted to mention, I was privy to St. Kitts when they were issuing the cards, and some of the things that a lot of people raised questions about it, about during the consultation session, people was raising questions about it, and they did not agree on fingerprinting. What they agreed on is, for instance, on the card, your full name. I think that should be adequate. Color photograph, a unique registration number that Dominica already have, that will never be assigned to anyone else. Dominica already have that. The gender, your date of birth, citizenship status, your height, occupation, date card was issued, date card will expire, high-tech holographic features, and the card holder signature. I think that's enough. Because in these days and so watching the situation of the world, with the World Economic Forum and what they plan for us, Negroes especially, I don't think it is wise to put our fingerprint on a card that we cannot protect.
Okay, well, your point has been taken. But I noticed from the consultation, I suspect a substantial number of people were supportive of the fingerprinting arrangement. But that's your opinion. Thanks.
Well, isn't the biometric data part of the new passports?
Yes, but I do not know whether it's fingerprint. But
Okay.
but I think there's some biometric data. It could be facial image or something of the sort.
Eye or something like that.
Yeah.
All right, but Mr. James, did you want to complete what you were saying before I interrupted you that call?
Yes. I'm saying that what we will have is a deepening of the fear factor among our people. People are afraid to speak. It's amazing, but I'm just asking Dominicans, those people who are silent, reflect on it. Reflect on the extent to which you are afraid to express your views. You're afraid to talk to your neighbors. You're afraid to talk to me, for them to see you talking to me. Okay, no matter how friends we are, sometimes we are family, but you're afraid for people to see you talking to me. Because why? You will be victimized. Your child will be victimized. Is that the kind of society we want? Free up yourself. Let's free up ourselves. 23 years is enough for one group of people to hold the reins of power or office in our country. There's no other democratic country operating in a democratic system. And okay, I'm going to allow, if you know one, tell me where that one group of people have been in office for 25 years. There's the democratic system, a true democratic system doesn't allow for that. And when I say democratic system, with all the facets of it. So think about it. Is that really what we want? Is that where we want to go? We talk about free from slavery. Is that where we want to go? The house of darkness, everybody sees, but nobody knows. It's up to you, people. It's up to you. I can only speak here now. I mean, there's nothing I'm looking for. again, I'm 80 in October. I thank God. I think, but I'm really appealing to you, as I said earlier. When you have a man like Brain Adams talking foolishness, you're an educator, you're a former educator, partner, come out from that morass and educate people, help them to understand, help them to free themselves from mental slavery. Daryl Titt, I'm hearing talking about it's treason to comment, to have an opposing voice. You have a fellow called Lauer. You have a right to talk, but my friends, sit down and reason this thing out. It cannot be that only one group of people have what it takes to run a country. And there's a time when you have to move on. Please.
Let's take a
So
call.
that is what you have.
Let's take a call, Lambi.
Good evening, caller. Please go ahead.
Are you truly interested?
So,
Right.
Sheridan, with respect, you see this gentleman, Mills? That's Mills. You see this gentleman, Mills? Again, I'm appealing to him, to my friend, your former superintendent of police. Stop making yourself a fool. You have a right to be involved in a discussion, but you have made yourself such a foolish kind of intervener that this is what's happening to you. You should be able to make a contribution to the dialogue and the discussion. So be prepared to engage, sit down, engage in debate, in discussion, a good moderator, and take an issue, and deal with it. I feel sorry for where you have put yourself. Let us get away from that. You served in Marigot. I was the PAL rep. We engaged. Stop making yourself a fool and a nuisance. If people have indicated that they prefer for you not to call the radio station, well, just, adhere to that. Get involved in a discussion and debate. That is foolishness. You're a big man. You see, Sheridan, these are the sort of things that electoral reform have an impact on. So when you see me, Mr. Mills, I'm not averse to you stopping me and telling me, Mr. J, what you talk about there, let's talk about it. Let me try and help you. You need help. Brain too. Daryl Titt. This guy called, what's his name, Clarence Christian, who I understand said, I saw him on social media saying he cannot stand me. Why you can't stand me? What's the problem? I can stand you, my friend. Let's dialogue. Let's engage.
Dr. Andre, did you want to add some more value to some of what we've been saying here tonight?
Well, what can you say? I mean, the fact of the matter is, there are people who have to take these public stances, well, more than one anyway, for their own survival. Their own survival. If the price, for example, of not being prosecuted for some misdeed is to daily sing the praises of the political directorate, that's what you'll do. Typically and invariably, those who are most gung-ho, cutting down persons who have the audacity to express a contrary view, are those who are indebted in some way or the other. Those who need to have their financial sins washed away. Some of those who may not have paid their taxes. Even a fishmonger in the market is supposed to pay taxes. And to continue to get the privilege of flaunting the law, they have to be stumbling over themselves, singing the praises and cutting people up. Just think of all of them, each of them, and ask themselves, what past do they have? An honorable past, a dubious past, and in some instances, a criminal past. So there's no mystery as to what's happening. There's none. There's none. Whether they're on radio, whether they're somewhere else, whether they're threatening to cause harm to someone who's done them no harm, they all can be lumped into the same category. They are the beneficiaries of wrongdoing. And to maintain that immunity, they have to continue saying what they're saying. And it's a very, very, very simple explanation for what's happening. The loudest of those, they all fall and they can be lumped into the same category. Mr. James mentioned some inspector. I'm not sure about him. I mean, I don't know his past. I mean, I don't know if, if his money has disappeared under his watch. I mean, how do I know? I know that I don't know which broomstick flew out of the room. I mean, what do I know, Mr. G? So it is no mystery why these fellas are making a sacrifice in their little integrity, because they have to be heard to support what's happening. So if they're not heard to support, their own financial well-being could be in jeopardy. Very simple.
Mr. James, well, all the good things come to an end. It's already, we passed our time already. And you just told us you were 80. So I'm sorry that we've taken you above the time. No doubt you handle it very well, because you certainly don't look 80 to me. I wish some people who are 40 now looked as good as you do. But I just wanted to say that we're coming down, we're winding down. So I wanted to see if you wanted to have some final remarks. Let's close down.
Yeah, well, Mr. G, just to thank you for the opportunity and to say that I hope that we have been able to move the goalpost a little further towards a deeper understanding of this question of electoral reform and the extent to which the electoral reform of which we speak can impact our lives, our governance, our well-being, our quality of life, and where we want to go. The need for people to recognize, as I said, that elections have consequences. And I trust that, some people, having listened to us tonight and process what you've said, will recognize and appreciate the role they have to play in contributing to this society being a better society. There are people who say now that this administration is presiding over a decadent and decaying society. There are people who feel that we all have a responsibility to look at that, see whether it's true, to the extent to which it is true, and to bring it back to right order, bring the society back to right order if we think it's in fact going down that road. Just a little coming back right home, I think reference has been made. I think I heard Dr. Andre reference asked the question, what's happening to is there Margaret Hospital? There's a building there which has been described as a facility to house a hospital. I heard Mr. Skerritt say that he had proposed naming the hospital after somebody who did not accept his proposal. Talking to a villager last week, the person interpreted that Mr. Skerritt was saying that he did not open the hospital because the person did not accept to have the hospital named after him. But what I know is that Marigot people should very soon, or are likely very soon, to be outside of the facility out there, expressing their concern and seeking answers and urging that everything be done to ensure that the hospital, the building out there, serves the people in the way that we were told it was supposed to serve us, that it was to provide medical services there, because it is unacceptable for a building which is now cost over around $59 million to have been closed for since 2014. And even when the construction work was finished a year and a half ago, that it remains not available to the public. So I believe that the authorities need to pay attention. The Minister of Health, his family lives a stone throw away from where the facility is now, so we urge him to pay some attention to that. But just to say again, on the electoral reform, we want to have the confirmation process that's provided for in the proposed legislation to happen in Dominica. We want the timeline for the legislation to be effected, to be maintained end of April. We heard that Mr. Byron is expected to submit his final report by the 25th of March. Let's hope that that happens and there's expedition in getting it implemented. The recommendations, we do not agree that there is need for any further consultation with respect to the consultation that Mr. Byron has been engaged in. That is just delay tactics. And we would urge the authorities to move away from this old worn-out tactics of delaying, and let us have the electoral reform that the people have been clamoring for. So thank you very much, and good night
Well,
to you.
just before I let you go, Mr. James, you've been around like me for a while. We have a sense of what national unity can look like in terms of achieving a certain purpose, a certain goal, a national goal. We've seen it happen. We've seen 79, we've seen other periods. Um, I just find, I don't know what you think, and Dr. Andre, there's so many different groups now. And every new group wants to say to the others that exist, you must come and join me and support me in what I do, but I'm not going to join and support you. I'm forming a new group. How do we get national unity and a sense of purpose to achieve a specific objective like electoral reform if every group wants to do whatever it wants to do and expect it some way, whatever it do, some other people must just join them, no matter what these other groups have been doing before? And do you think it makes sense for us to go that way, or should we learn lessons from our history and see that there needs at some point, if you have a specific objective, a specific goal, for all the groups to come under an umbrella, not a permanent thing, but to be operating under an umbrella so everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet? Because, the numbers, I mean, unity, there is strength, so if people get together, they will have numbers. And the question I asked from the very beginning, and I've been asking it for a while, and I've been saying for a while that no government in a democracy should be there so long. You have to change your government now and then so the government respects its people, the people who elect it. They are its boss, not the other way around. And it seems to me that what is happening now is not the way it should be going. And I'm just wondering why on earth it is that so many different groups want to do, and I'm hearing groups saying things contradicting each other when in fact, what they really want, all they really want, is to have good governance through free and fair elections. And then once you get that, let the chiefs fall where they may, whoever win. I don't know what your thoughts are on this, because I keep hearing all these new groups being formed and calling themselves a name, and they say, no, but these people are not coming and join us when we're doing so and so. Your thoughts on that, Mr. James?
Well, Sheridan, yes, it's better, I think, for us to have a oneness of mind, a oneness of purpose, a oneness of action in this matter. The organization with which I'm most recognized as being involved in has been this advocating this electoral reform issue since, I think, 2005, as was said at our national public rally in Salisbury a few weeks ago, 10th of December. We have a big tent, and we're inviting everybody to be part of that tent. There's room in the inn for everybody. And let's not fool ourselves. This is a political issue. It's a political issue. It's one political group and another political group, or other political groups. A political issue. So the notion that I don't want to be associated with politics and so on, let's put it aside and let us recognize that this electoral reform matter. Let us for one moment, or on this occasion, downplay the party political aspect of it that would probably make people feel that they don't want to associate and they want to do a new thing. There's a group that is in the lead. The other people who are not, they associate with the political party in other respects, but in this case, they want to have something else. I think each person has his own talent, his own ideas, and so on. Let all of it come under one umbrella and let us go. There was the other day a group calling itself Dominica. I can't remember what it was, but they organized the activity outside the parliament on the 7th of February. Our political leader, or president, and I'm talking about the United Workers' Party, or political leader or president were there. I was there. Other members on the executive party were there. That's another group which had organized that. So it's a question of identifying which group has the organizational wherewithal, has the numbers as part of its organization and structure, and let us all move in that direction, and put aside any notion that I don't want to get involved because I'm not in politics and so on. Let's not fool ourselves. This is politics, and that is the reality. And I agree with you. Let's go with one voice. I heard what you said about is there going to be a need for peaceful gatherings and so on. To the extent that there's a need for that, let those gatherings involve everybody. And I want to say to those people who think that they're above the fray, think about it again. One of these days, for instance, is my view that if there's an indication that the government is dragging its feet with respect to the timeline for this legislative action, that the whole country should take 1 or 2 days to express their disgust. And on those 1 or 2 days, the entire country should close its doors in solidarity. Close its doors. We're not asking for any violence. We're not asking for any, just close down your doors in solidarity with the move for free and fair elections. I don't have the authority of my party to say that it should lead on that mission, but if they want to do that, I will not stand in their way and monitor the situation. And if there's an indication that the government is not prepared to stick to the legislative timetable and to have the legislation passed by the end of April or as soon as possible thereafter, but I would say end of April, then there should be this kind of suggested movement and gathering of people. And it should not only be people who have been walking or have been going to rallies and so on, but the entire country should show, take a position, take a stand that election matters, election has an impact on our bread and butter issues, and we are prepared to stand together to ensure that we have free and fair elections in this country going forward.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mr. James. So, Dr. Andre, you can see, I mean, I think we've made the point tonight and we've established the fact that there is a key connection between electoral reform. Mr. James, maybe if you would just mute your mic, some of that sound may not come through. But Dr. Andre, what I was saying, we made a connection between electoral reform, free and fair elections, and good governance, and ensuring that you have the best chance of getting good governance. Because if any political party knows they cannot just bribe and treat their way into winning, they have to deserve of the support of the people, then they will do what has to be done to deserve of the support of the people. They will perform. But if you know you can just bribe and treat and buy votes, you don't need to perform. All you have to do is have money to bribe and treat and buy votes. So I think we've made the connection here. So and I think that is why it's important. So your own thoughts as well on the fact that there are so many individuals split into groups. And sometimes you get the impression that groups saying, oh, I'm not going in theirs, but you know, when I'm having mine, they should come. I'm not so sure exactly how is that going to get anybody anywhere. Nobody's saying that people should not have their individual groups. There's nothing wrong with that. But the fact of the matter, if there's a national goal that needs to be achieved, something as important as free and fair elections, it seems to me that groups can come together under an umbrella. You know, you might recall, although you're a very young fellow, you might recall there was a committee called the Committee for Good and Accountable Government. You might remember that thing?
I certainly do, my friend.
Right.
You ask yourself, who were the members?
Well, and then there was also one called the Committee for National Salvation, right? Mm-hmm. So it is not, our history shows that we've had those things before coming under an umbrella for a common cause to achieve a national goal. In this case, electoral reform for free and fair elections. Your final thoughts on Dr. Andre?
Well, we have no option but to achieve unity to get anywhere. That's just the bottom line. That's just the inconvenient truth. We can take solace in having our individual organizations. We can try to remain aloof from others. But I'll tell you, in a moment of national crisis, these divisions have to succumb to the bigger good. We have to ask ourselves whether we have it within us, to, instead of putting ourselves on a pedestal, whether in fact we can join hands and hearts in a common cause. And my question to you is very simple. If not the cause of good governance, or if not the cause of ensuring your country's future, what cause is greater than coming together, irrespective of whatever differences that you think you may have, irrespective of whatever complexes you may have, irrespective of whatever notions you may have of not wanting to become involved in politics. It's a sad state of affairs in Dominica where you have that concern, because anything related to good governance, your well-being, the state of the nation, the state of your families, inevitably involves some degree of politics. Politics is not some forbidden fruit that you should be afraid to eat. It is the very lifeblood of your nation. There's nothing to be afraid of. On the contrary, we should then embrace anything which impacts on our quality of life, on your nation's future, on your nation's development. That is the testament that hopefully we can leave this evening. You have nothing to fear but fear itself. In the march towards self-realization, self-actualization, the fulfillment of the promise of Dominica, these little phobias, these little attitudes should not be allowed to stand in the way of moving forward, of finding brotherhood or sisterhood with your fellow man or your fellow compatriot, your fellow men and your fellow women. Because everybody can make a contribution. Every person has his own individual talents, can make a contribution in some fashion. No one person has all the answers, has all the solutions. It is a collective energy that has to be mobilized and channeled into one glorious relationship of brotherhood to achieve one glorious goal: the restoring of the island of Dominica and liberating those creative forces and juices which can transform this country in a fashion that we would never deem to be possible in our darkest hour. That is the challenge. Do we have the wherewithal to dig deep and to summon, to open that door, that window of opportunity, to open that creativity, that potential that we all have, that energy, that spirit? Because ironically, it just depends on how deep you look historically. Very few Dominicans will find that they're not related in some fashion to another person. And sometimes it's a source of amusement to me when I find out that I have some type of ancestral link to that person. He or she may not want to admit to it, but it is a source of amusement to me oftentimes. But maturity in one sense is to accept things you cannot change. And you should not be deterred or distracted by those who maintain some type of attitude of superiority. You move on and you march on. And you continue to build those bridges of persons who at least can have a shared humanity or belief in a shared humanity, as opposed to those who believe they can walk on water. And Dominica is being transformed to a significant degree by those who believe they can walk on water, particularly because of ill-gotten gains. And that's why we have to reverse that trajectory of our history as it unravels before us, because it will cause significant harm in its wake. It is something not worth preserving. It is something not worth pursuing. In fact, it will leave the majority of us in a state of despondency, despair, and impoverishment. Dominica deserves much better. And that is why we have no choice but to continue to hope, because hope will always spring eternal, and we have an obligation to keep hope alive. I thank you for your program, Mr. G. I thank Lambie. I thank the Honorable James, yourself, Sherwin, if he's around, your listeners who've stayed up at this godforsaken hour to listen to the ramblings of certain persons who are in the twilight of their lives. But so it is. I will use whatever little breath I have to continue, because I don't know if tomorrow I'll have another one. So good night to you.
And Dr. Andre, thanks so much for that, and so much. Thank you so much, Mr. James, as well. I don't think Dr. Andre was talking about you when he was talking about Twilight and so on. I think maybe he was talking to me.
Well, Mr. G, after all.
Right? Well, I know my place. I know Edison is nowhere close to that Twilight business you're talking about there, but I know where I stand. So, but
well, I know where you sit, actually.
but nonetheless, I really thought the conversation was good. I think we did make the connection, the important connection between electoral reform, free and fair elections, and good governance, which affects people's lives, their families' lives, their children's lives, their brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, grandmothers' lives. That's very important. And so we want to restore the democracy. I really think we should restore the democracy. I mean, this business of being able to bribe and treat just to stay in power, I mean, this should no longer be applicable. We should get rid of that and level the playing field. Let the chips fall where they may. It's a political party to benefit. In 1979, when all this Committee for National Salvation got together and did what they did, who benefited ultimately was the Dominica Freedom Party. They came into office, in 1980. The fact of the matter is, it is the political parties that are going to have to drive the politics and to form a government. It is not civic organizations. Civic organizations could be involved, and some of them could get into a government that is formed. I'll never forget in 1980, Arthur Martin became part of that government, that interim government, right? When the Labour Party came into office, was it in 2000? I think Arthur Martin also was a part of that government as Minister for Agriculture. The point is that, Dominicans should understand that democracy is important. It's very, very, very important to maintain. There's not a better system that I know of anywhere. And therefore, we have to try to preserve ours. We're on the brink. We don't want ours to go over the edge. We've seen what happens in countries where the democracy is faltering. Economies have failed. The whole government structure is broken down. Gangs and all that sometimes just take over and run the things. So we do not want that to happen in Dominica. So I pray that all of us, in whatever organizations that we are, would learn some lessons from that and come together and demand that we have free and fair election to preserve our democracy. Wear whatever hat you have to wear, but come together in one umbrella as one unit, a unified people. Lend your voice to this cause, this important cause of getting the process of free and fair elections well underway, beginning with ensuring that the draft laws that go to Parliament, whether it is in May or April or wherever it is, are the right laws. The people must insist that they are the right laws. The whole question, as we said before, we outlined the whole question of registration and re-registration in Dominica. We outlined the whole question of the voter ID cards and biometric data. And we talk about campaign finance reform. We have to bring that down, because you cannot tell me that you allow one party to have 70 million and the other party doesn't have 500,000. How are we going to get free and fair elections? You can't. An election should no longer be guided and governed by CO and having all kind of. What happened to the values of plans and policies and strategies to develop your economy and your people and your education and health? We don't hear that's gone out the window now. All you hear about CO, and people taking out MAPE on political platforms. I think the young people of today, in this day and age of technology, they can just go to Google and they'll get all the information they want in the world, and they know that is no longer applicable. They should ask for a new dispensation. I think the young people must take the lead now. Ask for a new dispensation, a paradigm shift. Take us away from all the CO and MAPE and Mobile and get down to real business, because young people should be fed up, in fact, of having to go away and say they cannot come home and get a job. They have to go and develop some other person's country. So, gentlemen, I want to thank you so much tonight for all that you've contributed into this discussion. I thank the callers. I thank all the persons who are still with us on Facebook and on YouTube. And Lambi and Sherwin, of course, for being with us here tonight. So thank you, Dr. Andre, again. Thank you, Mr. James. And let us say to our man, Gable, get well soon, Gable. I hope the voice gives you a little ease up. Okay, so we'll talk to you tomorrow.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night,
Thank
everybody.
you. Bye.
All right.
Looking out my window, and I'm thinking of tomorrow, and I'm wondering what the future will be. Thinking of the children who are the victims of oppression, beaten down by words and eaten up by starvation. I'm saying, when there's ugly will be over, and the children can go out and play. I wanna see when all oppression will be done, and the people will rise up and say, freedom at last, freedom at last, so free, freedom has come, freedom has come, oh yeah. Shall have something in seclusion, and I'm in my meditation, and I can hear the voice of the sufferers cry for justice. Ooh, another ugly war is raging, threats of nuclear war is rising, and the world is gripped by fear of mass destruction. I'm saying, when